This is the week of November 26, 2018, and you're tuned into The Revolution. In today's episode, you'll be hearing two articles that appear in this week's edition of Revolution newspaper, as updated on the website RevCom.us, the voice of the Revolutionary Communist Party, USA. First, dissecting and revealing the truth in Trump's cold-blooded statement on the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The world is a dangerous place, and we're going to commit any crime, tell any lie, and support any butcher to keep America first. Also today, the Pittsburgh Synagogue Massacre, Trump and the rise of anti-Semitism, why support for Israel is not inconsistent with anti-Semitism. Dissecting and revealing the truth in Trump's cold-blooded statement on the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The world is a very dangerous place, and we're going to commit any crime, tell any lie, and support any butcher to keep America first. America first. That's how Donald Trump began and ended his November 20 statement addressing Saudi Arabia's gruesome murder and dismemberment of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul, Turkey on October 2nd. Khashoggi's murder had sparked a global furor and created what the Washington Post called a quote-unquote foreign policy crisis for the U.S. Trump had dodged and double-talked around the issue of who was responsible for the killing for weeks. But growing evidence and even a CIA assessment that Trump ally Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman MBS had ordered the assassination, along with the way in which the Khashoggi furor was turning global attention towards the towering war crimes being committed by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia in Yemen, forced Trump's hand. Trump didn't back down from his support for MBS and the blood-soaked medieval Saudi kingdom. He doubled down, and in the course of his lie-filled fascist rant, he laid bare some truths about what this country is all about, what it really brings to the world, and the serious difficulties America's empire is mired in. Just titling a statement about this brutal murder, standing with Saudi Arabia, and starting and ending it with declarations of America first, spoke volumes and sent a barbaric message. This made clear that he and his regime weren't going to let Jamal Khashoggi's murder, concern for traditional norms like abiding by international law, professed concerns for human rights and press freedoms, and even a little thing like the truth, get in the way of their pursuit of naked imperialist domination and plunder. Instead, they stood ready to commit any crime, tell any lie, and embrace any ally, no matter how barbaric, if that advanced the interest and overcame the obstacles faced by their predatory system. The world is a very dangerous place, Trump continued, but he wasn't talking about how the U.S. had made it that way for decades by launching wars of aggression in Korea, Vietnam, Central America, Iraq, Afghanistan, that have slaughtered tens of millions. No, he was talking about the dangers to America's global dominance, to America first, that were growing because of the contradictions rendering the old liberal, red imperialist, world order. Wars like the U.S. invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq were meant to secure American preeminence. Instead, they ended up contributing to a world in which American dominance and empire is being challenged from many different directions, by China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran, by reactionary Islamic fundamentalist militaries, by rival imperialists in Europe, and Trump represents one extreme imperialist answer to that, the one in power and determined to hammer into place a fascist regime. targeting Iran, not for Khashoggi's murder, but for challenging American dominance. These challenges are especially acute in the Middle East, and Trump immediately pivoted not to anything that had anything to do with Jamal Khashoggi's murder, but to one of those dangers for America first, Iran. Quote, "The country of Iran, as an example, is responsible for a bloody proxy war against Saudi Arabia in Yemen," end quote, Trump claimed, and then he ran out a litany of other offenses in Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. And it's true. Since the revolution of 1979 that overthrew the US-backed Shah, Iran's reactionary Islamic Republic hasn't been under the US thumb and has extended its reach and influence across the region, in sharp competition with Saudi Arabia, and does threaten the US death grip on the Middle East 400 million overwhelmingly oppressed and impoverished peoples. While this naked imperialist geostrategic obsession with quote-unquote solving the Iran problem is shared by the entire US ruling class, there are sharp contradictions over how to do that. These contradictions found expression in Trump's reversal of the nuclear agreement negotiated by Obama, but extends even into Trump's own team. One point of this speech, as we'll get into, was to set terms on that for the whole ruling class. Saudi Arabia, by contrast, is a bulwark for the American empire and a key spearhead of the escalating and dangerous U.S. offenses against Iran, a role the Khashoggi murder has seriously complicated. This, not business interests, is at the core of Trump's bond with MBS, and Trump made it clear he'd do everything in his power to try and ensure that Khashoggi's murder would not be allowed to weaken that bond or their joint offensive against Iran. Greenlighting mass murder in Yemen. Trump's lies regarding Yemen were especially outrageous and revealed the enormity of the crimes this fascist regime is willing to carry out in service of America first. After blaming Iran for starting the war in Yemen, a blatant lie, Saudi Arabia launched the war in March 2015. He claimed, quote, Saudi Arabia would gradually withdraw from Yemen if the Iranians would agree to leave. They would immediately provide desperately needed humanitarian assistance, end quote. Say what? Iran may have provided Yemen's Houthis, who are fighting the Saudis, some minimal military aid and political support, but they can't, quote-unquote, agree to leave Yemen because their forces have never been shown to be in Yemen. But Saudi Arabia and its allies are in Yemen, 150,000 troops and 100 warplanes which have conducted close to 20,000 bombing raids. These Saudi forces are deliberately destroying Yemen's food, water, and health systems and blocking humanitarian relief. In short, using starvation and disease as weapons in a war that's murdered 50,000 people, starved 85,000 children to death, and pushed 14 million people to the brink of famine. And America and its planes and its bombs and its special forces are in Yemen too, making the slaughter possible and helping turn Yemen into the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today. In the face of these monstrous horrors, Trump's lies turned reality on its head and greenlighted further Saudi aggression there, aggression which now threatens to cut off Yemen's only lifeline for humanitarian aid, the port of Hodeidah. Hawking a shameful, chauvinist bargain, American jobs for Middle East blood. Trump then went on to heap praise on Saudi Arabia. This longtime U.S. ally under both Democrats and Republicans is one of the most oppressive states in the world. Women have virtually no rights, and people who violate even minor tenets of Islamic law or who dissent against the ruling House of Saud are publicly whipped or beheaded on a very regular basis. But Trump didn't care about any of that. He crowned that the, quote, kingdom agreed to spend and invest $450 billion in the United States, This is a record amount of money. It will create hundreds of thousands of jobs, tremendous economic development, and much additional wealth for the United States." End quote. These are widely exposed lies. The Saudis have reportedly only pledged to buy $14.5 billion in U.S. arms. But Trump was dangling this to whip up and unite people around bellicose chauvinism and a poisonous bargain. Don't think about the murdered journalist, the starving children, the war-ravaged environment. Just think about your own country and your own economic position and support whatever crimes we deem necessary, and you'll get a share of the spoils of global plunder. Trump finally gets to Khashoggi. Only after all this, after setting down an ideological orientation of America first and a strategic orientation of the need to work with Saudi Arabia to crush Iran, only then did Trump even bring up Khashoggi. First, there's some disingenuous double talk about how this was a terrible crime and that our country does not condone. Okay, box checked. The U.S. does not officially support chopping up dissidents into little pieces. But right from there, in classic Trumpian style, he brings up that some, quote, say that Jamal Khashoggi was an enemy of the state and a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, end quote. Read between the lines and Trump is saying that Khashoggi got what he had coming. And by the way, Trump implies that the enemies of the people, journalists, in the U.S. deserve the same treatment. Then the real kicker. Trump says, it could be very well that the Crown Prince had knowledge of this tragic event. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. In other words, even if MBS did it, it doesn't matter because our imperialist interests come first. And, quote, the kingdom has been a great ally in our very important fight against Iran. The United States intends to remain a steadfast partner of Saudi Arabia to ensure the interest of our country, Israel, and all other partners in the region, end quote. Here again, Trump is blustering, but also reveals some of the profound strategic weaknesses and challenges the U.S. faces in the Middle East. Most of its allies, including Saudi Arabia, are widely hated, internally fragile tyrannies, providing over viciously oppressed and repressed populations. The exception as regards to this internal fragility is the settler colonial state of Israel, America's main military bastion in the region, but even in the case of Israel, its merciless ethnic cleansing has failed to break the resistance of the Palestinian people, and its assaults on the Palestinians are increasingly condemned all over the world, including by a growing number of Jewish people. Trump threatens his ruling class critics. Go ahead, make my day. Trump concludes by threatening his ruling class critics, none of whom says the U.S. should not have been extremely close with Saudi Arabia or should not have been putting a heavy squeeze on Iran or rules out war with Iran. They just favor the traditional global norms and alliances as the best way to maintain U.S. imperialist control. In particular, these critics, ranging from the Democratic Party to Republican Senator and Trump supporter Lindsey Graham, along with perhaps forces in his own administration, are concerned that MBS may be recklessly propelling the U.S. toward another war, which could end up weakening the U.S. hold on the Middle East, and perhaps worse. They are further worried that this whole incident weakens the legitimacy of MBS and the Saudis in any future conflict with Iran, and is already having unpredictable and negative consequences from the viewpoint of U.S. imperialist interests in other power relations and arrangements in that part of the world. And they're worried that brazenly ignoring any pretense of human rights, justice, truth, and nakedly practicing might makes right politics will expose the core nature of U.S. capitalism and imperialism and call its legitimacy into question at home and around the world. Trump seems to acknowledge these concerns. Quote, I understand there are members of Congress who, for political and other reasons, would like to go to a different direction, and they are free to do so. I will consider whatever ideas are presented to me, end quote. Only to forcefully dismiss them. Quote, but only if they are consistent with the absolute security and safety of America, As President of the United States, I intend to ensure that, in a very dangerous world, America is pursuing its national interest and vigorously contesting countries that wish to do us harm. Very simply, it is called America First." End quote. In other words, this is what we are doing. If you agree, I will listen to your ideas. If you don't agree, shut up. And Trump's warning that the world is a very dangerous place is aimed at reminding people, including people in the ruling class, and even including people within the regime, what time it is. He has told the world, again, what will we do? Why support for Israel is not inconsistent with anti-Semitism. From a Revolution Club member. I thought the article about the Pittsburgh Synagogue Massacre, Donald Trump, and the rise of anti-Semitism was really good and important. In response to the argument that Trump can't be anti-Semitic because he's such a supporter of Israel, the article correctly points out that, quote, "This support has nothing to do with concern for Jewish people, much less Muslims. No, it is grounded in the role Israel plays in the world for the U.S., in particular as a bastion for its domination of the Middle East, as well as the Christian fanaticism of a section of Christian evangelicals, the Christian fascists of whom Mike Pence is a key leader." End quote. And that this Christian fascist support for Israel is rooted in anti-Semitism. But I think there's more to say on the relation between Israel and anti-Semitism, and why support for Israel is not at all inconsistent with anti-Semitism. Historically, the Zionist movement in Europe arose as a response to anti-Semitism. But unlike the communists of Jewish and non-Jewish descent, who fought to defeat anti-Semitism as part of the fight to abolish all forms of oppression and exploitation, and others who fought it out of their commitment to justice and equality, the Zionists basically accepted the permanence of anti-Semitism, capitulating to it in that sense. I recognize the emptiness and futility of trying to combat anti-Semitism, Zionism founder Theodor Herzl wrote, and sought an escape. This, of course, aligned with the anti-Semitic sentiments of many who wanted the Jews out anyway. Not unlike the many racists, Abraham Lincoln included, who supported back to Africa schemes for solving America's quote-unquote race problem. Remember, before devising his final solution, Hitler initially planned to deport the Jews rather than exterminate them. And for the Zionists, Hitler's rise to power was seen as a confirmation of their view that Jewish integration into European society was hopeless. Rather than condemning and combating Nazism, many Zionist leaders saw it as an opportunity, a quote-unquote fertile force, as David Ben-Gurion put it, to encourage Jewish emigration to Palestine. While Jewish organizations in the U.S. and throughout the world were organizing boycotts of Hitler's Germany, the Zionist settler colonial forces in Palestine continued diplomatic and economic relations with Germany through the pre-war years. From 1933 to 1939, the Nazis and German Zionist leaders had a mutually beneficial quote-unquote transfer agreement to get Jews, particularly wealthy Jews and Zionists, out of Germany and into Palestine. During World War II, one Zionist paramilitary group, the quote-unquote Stern Gang, even offered to fight for the Nazis in exchange for the transfer of Jews from Nazi-occupied Europe to Palestine. In 1938, after the Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass pogrom, throughout Germany, when England was compelled to let in a few thousand Jewish refugees, David Gurion made the following statement: "If I knew that it was possible to save all the children of Germany by transporting them to England, and only half by transferring them to the land of Israel, I would choose the latter. For before us lies not only the number of these children, but the historical reckoning of the people of Israel." Such was the concern of Israel's founding father for the lives of the Jewish people as a whole. The Zionists built their colonial project on two big lies. One, that God promised the land to the Jews, and two, that this was a, quote, land without a people, for a people without a land. Their land-obsessed nationalism mimicked the blood and soil logic of their anti-Semitic persecutors. The State of Israel was founded on the ashes of the terroristic destruction of hundreds of Palestinian villages and ethnic cleansing of almost 1 million Palestinians from the territory, which could not have happened without the crucial role played by Zionist paramilitary forces, some of whom literally modeled themselves on Italian fascists. Here's how Israeli historian Tom Segev describes the horrible irony of 100,000 Jews, mostly Holocaust survivors, taking over Palestinian homes. Free people, Arabs, had gone into exile and become destitute refugees. Destitute refugees, Jews, took the exiles' places as a first step in their new lives as free people. One group lost all they had, while the other found everything they needed: tables, chairs, closets, pots, pans, plates, sometimes clothes, family albums, books, radios, and pets. Most of the immigrants broke into the abandoned Arab houses without direction, without order, without permission. For several months, the country was caught up in a frenzy of take what you can, first come, first served. Israel, which has been a Nakba, a catastrophe, for the Palestinian people since day one, and an unrelenting nightmare ever since, all while pretending to be an enlightened democracy for all, is now resolving the inherent contradiction in a quote-unquote democratic Jewish state by throwing off the democratic facade, which was always very thin, and implementing open Jewish fascism. With the same logic of the Charlottesville Nazi chant, "The Jews will not replace us," flipped and applied to Arabs, Israel's new law, declaring itself officially a, quote, nation-state of the Jewish people, formalizes Jewish supremacy. Gaza turned into a giant concentration camp. Repeated mass slaughters of Palestinians and the specter of a mass, quote-unquote, transfer, or even final solutions. The victims of the Nazis acting like Nazis. What a moral disaster. And how did Israel's leaders respond to the mass murder of 11 Jews in the Pittsburgh Synagogue? Activists in Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party circulated an email upholding the shooter's rationale, blaming the synagogue for its involvement with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which the email said, quote, encouraged immigration, and acted against Trump, thereby encouraging anti-Semitism. The main emissary from Israel that went to Pittsburgh after the shooting, Naftali Bennett, is a pro-Trump fascist notorious for whipping up a pogromist atmosphere against African migrants in Israel, who he has called, quote-unquote, infiltrators, and accused of spreading crime and rape. Sound familiar? The increasingly theocratic state of Israel's chief rabbi refused to call the Tree of Life Synagogue a synagogue because it's not the Orthodox brand of Judaism. Israel is proudly linked to fascist forces internationally, not only in the U.S. and now Brazil, but also more direct Nazi descendants in Hungary and Poland, for example, joining their chorus of anti-Semitic attacks on George Soros. For the Zionists, things have truly come full circle. As Bob Avakian has pointed out, there have been two responses to the Holocaust, two meanings to the idea, never again. One response is, never again should something like this happen to anyone. The other response is, never again should this happen to us, and on that basis, anything we do to others is justified. Where the latter one leads is on full display. in the State of Israel. Also in this week's issue, from the Revolution Club, Los Angeles, on the wildfires in California and the need for an actual revolution. And Hillary Clinton to 65 million desperate refugees. Stay put, shut up, and drop dead.
You can find these articles and so much more at revcom.us. revcom.us/revolution newspaper, the lifeline that cuts through events to reveal the need for revolution and how to move now to hasten and prepare for that revolution. Revcom.us is the voice of the Revolutionary Communist Party, USA.